Is everyone able to hear me? All right. If at any point you can't or you need me to do anything to make this presentation more accessible to you, just please let me know. I haven't quite learned how to do the CC on Canva yet. And so unfortunately, there aren't closed captions here, but hopefully folks will be able to follow along. And if anyone needs additional descriptions later on, feel free to just email me and I'll be happy to share anything that may have been missed due to my lack of preparation for accessibility. So definitely don't feel like you have to do extra. I will make up for that. So hi, everyone. Welcome. And thank you for joining us. I hope all is well as the summer kind of ramps up and temperatures climb. Thank you for taking the time to explore and learn with me and each other about this topic that I am now pretty much obsessed, and that is becoming a defenseless disruptor. Oh, there we go. Oh, you can turn, I just got a little note about turning on closed captions through maybe Zoom. Is that right, Amber? Okay, so let me, if you all don't mind, I'm just going to take a moment and try and do that if I can. So it's not in the bottom corner, I don't think, because I'm sharing. So I'm just going to stop for a moment and then do a live transcript and see if that works. All right. So hopefully that will give us, yes, perfect. We've got some captions. Thank you so much, Amber. All right, now I'm going to go back to sharing and we'll get right back to it. So welcome again. Thank you all for coming. My name is Sonia David, and I try my best to kind of keep up with what's going on here, and wanted to kind of bring a new idea to you all that I thought would be of interest. And again, as it gets hotter, I hope that everyone is still staying well and staying hydrated. Yeah, so let's get started. A bit about myself. I have a bachelor's in political science and religion and an MDiv in kind of a combination of Christianity, African-American religious traditions. And I focused my time on looking at the intersections between power, privilege, and oppression throughout my educational journey. But I've also been really interested in the intersections of identities and how they interact at those intersections of power, privilege, and oppression. So you're going to get a taste of that throughout this presentation as well. And I'm really excited to be partnering with the Society of Diversity today. So as we get started, I'd love to learn a little bit about you all and also get a chance for you all to learn about each other. I definitely want this to be an interactive experience. And so we're going to do a few check-ins like this throughout. But if you could just pop into the chat what your name is, maybe where you're based, and one thing that you're hoping to leave with today. I'll be kind of cycling through the chat to make sure I don't miss anything. It might take me a second to get to you unless you speak up. So feel free if you need to say, I have a question. That's totally fine. Or Amber, if you see a question in the chat, please feel free to kind of say, hold on, there's a question here. That would be really helpful. But for now, I'd love to know who you are and where you're joining in from. All right, we got Jay in Portland, Judy in Allentown, Bridget in Raleigh. Hi, Susan in North Carolina. Hi, Julie. All right, we've got Northern Virginia, okay. All right, and we're increasing our influence today. We are learning more today. Let's see what else we've got. Looking for something timely. wanting to learn more about the Defenseless Disruptor. Thank you for saying it's timely. All right, so we're going to do some defenseless disrupting today. As you are able, please feel free to chime in. I'm going to make sure that we keep moving here. So a little bit of a story time now. I want to share with you all a little bit about myself, because you do know a little bit more about my educational background, but you might not know that, for example, I am one of 3 siblings. And so you might say that I was kind of built to look into conflict, especially as the middle child. And so this interest in conflict and exclusion has really been something that feels more like a calling than anything to me. And I was inspired by the interpersonal challenges, inequalities, and injustices that I would see all around me, whether it was at home between my siblings or out in the world at school. I really feel like it shaped and developed who I am. And I wanted to make the world a better place, or at least my little nugget of it. So I trained and participated by participating in team sports, learning how to build cohesion. I became a group fitness instructor, wanting to help people achieve their goals as a collective. I studied for years in higher education, learning about how people could collaborate more effectively. And I talked to I would say my mom, in my mom's opinion, way too many strangers to try and learn more about what makes people tick, and kind of make my life one big learning opportunity. But at each stage, I found myself seeing more conflict kind of develop as people were engaging, especially when we would sort of engage on topics where our worldview or position really was in opposition with the other. And it didn't seem that it would matter whether I was talking to someone who I was really closely aligned with, or someone who I had a great deal of distance with, whether it was politically or socially. There was still this kind of divide or this difficulty in discussing those bigger differences. And ultimately, the conversation would shut down. And I would observe these conversations shut down even when I wasn't a participant in those conversations. But what I felt was a little bit worse, and what saddened me the most, was that I felt like I was shutting down too. And according to the Pew Research Center, that divisiveness is not just a feeling. We see that across political parties, there is deep division, one that's deeper than it has been in the past decade and the decade before that, when it comes to our political standings, but it goes even further than that. So our divisions across these political ideologies actually is affecting our ability to feel as though we are able to support our own well-being. And so we see each other at a national level as if we're a threat to one another's national well-being. And that was a huge surprise to me. This is a study that was done in 2014, around the time that I was starting to develop these ideas. And so I thought to myself, well, if that's what's happening, maybe what we need to do is bring each other together, have a lot of rules and regulations, and discuss our differences, defend our ideas with facts, communicate nonviolently, use emotional intelligence, and kind of put ourselves out there in a way that was professional, but that would get the job done. And I think to a degree, it seems that most people would agree with that, right? That sharing our ideas, using logic and reason, sharing facts, using emotional intelligence would be an effective way of communicating. But I felt that there was something missing, and an opportunity to turn this debate sort of setup into something that looks more like this. But I have a strong feeling it's going to be nearly impossible as long as we prioritize changing each other's minds and even changing each other's ways. And hopefully I didn't lose you on that last point. I know that it's a disruptive claim to say that we shouldn't be trying to influence one another in this kind of way, but I didn't use the word influence on purpose. I think that we can never change someone else's mind or change someone else's ways. That's up to them. But what we can do is be a positive influence on one another and leave a lot of space for people to explore with us. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So before we get too far into it, I want to make sure that you all know that this is not something I came up with in a vacuum, but that does have a bit of a background to it and some inspiration. So the nonviolent protests and nonviolent civil disobedience models used especially in the 60s during civil rights and in other areas around the world, most notably South Africa and India, are a huge influence on me, as well as the International Institute for Restorative Practices, which is kind of a lay person's use for restorative justice practices, which I highly recommend checking out. They have a lot of great free resources. And then, of course, my eyes were opened when I kind of was introduced to Brene Brown. And I feel that each one brought me some element of this defenseless disruptor model that I thought was really helpful, starting with nonviolence, right? Communication skills, and being vulnerable and authentic. But none of them did for me alone what I believe the most influential person for me has done. And that is, for me, kind of my role model of the defenseless disruptor. And I'll introduce her to you in just a little bit. But before we go on, I want to make sure that we have a basis for what we're talking about. So if you'll look on the right, or your left probably, I have a question for you, which is if you could share just 2 words that come to mind when you think of the word disruptor. And you can pop those in the chat. And maybe Amber, if you wouldn't mind reading them out loud. I lost the chat just now. Thank you.
Pause. Change. Change again. Calm. Advocate.
I heard cause, change, and advocate. Is that right?
And calm.
Calm.
Interrupt.
Interrupt. Okay. These are all really good. And there are no wrong answers. I'm going to move us to a quick definition. So we've got the definition of disruptor as defined by Cambridge, which is, or Cambridge University, which is a person or thing that prevents something, especially a system, process, or event from continuing as usual or as expected. And I think that usually that is kind of a surprising definition, I think, for folks, because we think of disruption, especially when we use it in that form, as disruption, as something that cuts us off or keeps us from moving forward. But in fact, it's the thing that changes the way that we move forward. And there's actually a velocity and a momentum to it and a movement, which I thought was really creative and, or not creative, but interesting and helpful in creating another way of looking at this, another connotation to disruptor. And I'm certainly not the first one to have that kind of idea. Looking at Forbes, we see that being a disruptor is largely seen as a helpful way of being in business. And so being a disruptor isn't simply about doing something better than the competition. It's about creating something, a product, service, or process that turns the market on its head and puts you at the forefront, right? So being a disruptor is about asking the right questions and coming up with answers that barely even acknowledge a competition exists, right? We're focused on solving a problem that consumers may not know that they have. And when we're thinking about consumers in terms of DE&I, we're thinking about our conversation partners, we're thinking about our leaders, we're thinking about those people who have the power of the pen or the purse to make things happen in our organizations, right? And we want to do those things in ways that, sure, maybe they are things that consciously disrupt the way that we operate, but honestly, unconscious interruptions and disruptions can work too. So sometimes we want to help people to use tools that they don't even know that they're using, turning otherwise eccentric ideas into centers of forward thinking. So checking in again, I want to see what our connotations and our feelings are around the word defenselessness. So if you all could pop in the chat, maybe 1 or 2 words that remind you of, or that you think of when you think of the word defenselessness, and then Amber can read them off for us.
Weak, vulnerable, vulnerable.
Weak and vulnerable. I would imagine that that would kind of just be everyone's 2 words over and over again.
Power.
Loss of power.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are big ones. So our definition of defenselessness is not different from that. We have defenseless people, animals, places, or things as being weak or unable to protect themselves from attack. And I think that this is, you know, a bit of a trick, a bit of a gap to breach here. So I know I'm calling on our creative kind of suspension of disbelief. But I think defenselessness gets a bit of a bad rap, especially in the United States. We tend to value rigorous defense of thoughts and ideas, direct evidence of usefulness based on a history of traditions. We even use language of violence to describe our nonviolent protestations across history, right? We fight for justice, we demand peace, we campaign for equality. There isn't a lot of synergy across defenselessness and our success or our perceived success in societal sort of movement towards progress and inclusion. But I want to challenge that a little bit because it seems that we almost have to always compete for a better tomorrow when it might be possible to just turn away from yesterday and look towards tomorrow and create it ourselves. And this is where I'd like to introduce you to the person who I feel is my kind of prototype for the Defenseless Disruptor. And she has influenced me now for about 15 years. And that is Toni Morrison. Now that might be a surprise for some. A lot of people know that Toni Morrison is kind of a certified badass. And you wouldn't be wrong, she absolutely is. I had the pleasure of meeting her and I can confirm. This human mother, Nobel laureate, author, visionary, and all-around genius was the key to unlocking what is now my professional obsession within DE&I. In her speech series at Sanders Theater in 2016, Toni Morrison explains that her writing is for something that I didn't even realize consciously, but I was attracted to and kind of needed, and I feel attracted a lot of people to her work. And that was to countervailing the culture of literary racism by telling stories built just for her audience. In doing so, she was inviting people to read her work and either tap into their experiences that resonated or go out and learn about what it is she writes about and then come back and read her books. But it really changed the way that we experience reading. And especially for myself, it changed the way that I experienced reading because I was reading a story that was written with me in mind. And that was in consideration of a young Black woman who could look up to this author, right, and feel like she was telling me my story, and that I didn't have to look for an entry point. The whole book was the door to another world that was built just for me. And I wanted to do exactly that, but in my own field. And that's what I'm hoping to be doing with you all today. I hope that's how you're feeling this is going so far. Because I want to work with you all, right, to create space for innovation, for disrupting the status quo and helping others to find their inspiration, to be brave and kind of fly in the face of societal challenges, but with creative solutions. And I think that the creative solutions piece might be what sets this process apart from other iterations of nonviolence and vulnerability and authenticity that we've seen in the past. And I could literally talk about Toni Morrison all day, so I'm gonna try not to do that because we have a limited amount of time here. So I wanna talk about, well, first, I promised that we'd leave having explored some tools on how to supercharge our influence in the workplace. And so we're definitely gonna do that right now. So let's take a look at how the Defenseless Disruptor looks across 3 different kind of key areas that we often touch as DEI professionals or working adjacent to DEI professionals. So we're going to look at strategy, solutions, and collaboration. First, strategy. So Indeed.com is a great resource for revisiting elements of workplace strategy, and I highly recommend checking it out. There you have really effective blog posts, and this slide is sourced from there. They encourage readers to think through mission, vision, and shared values. When it comes to operating as a defenseless disruptor in the workplace, we can advance our strategy in the face of resistance by doing a few of the following. First, identifying your shared vision, mission, and values within the organization. Where do you align, and what is kind of your hook and that thing that you know everyone will understand? Identify objectives that advance and share mission and align with that shared mission and align with your shared values across the organization. Illuminate and innovate ideas and promising practices with lessons from traditions and past practices. How do they differ? What is it that your idea offers that past traditions have missed, and how can you bridge that gap? Which brings us to solutions. So being solution-oriented is key to effective defenseless disruption, because the goal is to turn to alternate practices by demonstrating a powerful option that our organizations have not already considered. Harvard Business Review reminds us to engage in our kind of growth mindset when we're doing this, to activate change when we're trying to achieve goals as a team. Defenseless disruptors can provide solutions in the workplace when we ground our goals in growth, suggest benchmarks that affect change without blame, prepare to participate fully in the planning or execution of our solution, and to set healthy boundaries for yourself between your efforts and your outcome. And I think those last two are really important, right? Because sometimes we're going to be asked to do something that takes up more time than we can use and that we can apply to a project. So having a healthy way to say, I have to separate myself from the outcome because I can't have my hands in it, is a huge piece. I know that for a lot of people that I've met who have experienced burnout, and for myself when I've experienced burnout, a lot of that has had to do with not having the ability to make the change I wanted to make because I was otherwise overly taxed with my day-to-day. And so being able to either delegate and then feel at peace with those folks who have it in their hands, or find good external vendors, is going to be key to kind of maintaining your peace. And now collaboration, getting back to that, we had to delegate and we need to do things together. So to be an effective disruptor, we can't do it alone. One company that embodies collaboration, I think, is Slack, and they offer so many suggestions on how to work effectively together on teams. So activating our defenselessness on to collaborate on execution and disruption can be one of the hardest parts of getting work done using this method, because we as practitioners might be using it, but those who we're working with might not. And so how to bridge that is going to be key.
Hey, Sonia.
Yes.
Hey, Dr. Caldwell would like for you to say more about the second one.
Yeah, sure. Let's go back. Can you give me a little bit more on where you'd like to hear more?
Yeah, this one right here in solutions, the suggest benchmarks that affect change without blame. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. So one of the huge things about a company is that on the one hand, we are not the company, and we know that, right? Each of us as individuals do not solely and capture all of what a company has done, even if you were talking about the present, but certainly not when you look at the past when you weren't there, right? And so being able to kind of draw a bit of a distance between leadership and the results that we're dealing with and talking about can open up the conversation for folks to realize that the focus is we're working on making a positive change here. And it's not so much important that we assign blame or fault as it is that we identify the challenge and the difficulty. And that can be a little bit tricky because on the one hand, there is like kind of this desire to be like, and you did this. And I do understand that. I feel it all the time. That's why this was so revolutionary for me. But when you let that part go momentarily just to get people on board, usually they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this, right? And it's much more effective and powerful for a person to realize that themselves than to tell someone that and then bring them into a place of defensiveness as well. And so bringing that sort of element of defensiveness out of your participant, out of your conversation partner as much as possible, I think kind of, what's the right word, diffuses that situation before it becomes that powder keg, right? Where suddenly you're not invited to that next meeting because they feel threatened or have that sort of barrier there.
Yeah, how do you jump from the place of people wanting this work until you start asking them to do the work? And then it's like, oh, this is for everyone else. I don't have this issue, whether it's racism, sexism, whatever the ism. How, you know, I've had allegations against me because people don't want to work on themselves, right? And so I don't know how to bridge that gap.
Can you give me an example? Let's work on it. We have time.
I called out a man who was telling me how to write my own DEI copy because I'm the DEI manager, and he was telling me that he wanted to have final say on my copy. And I said, no, you're not trained in DEI work. And he said that, you know, he was the marketing and communications director. And I said, you know, it feels like you're using your white male privilege to force me to do what you want me to do. And I got written up for calling out white male privilege.
Yes, I feel that in my soul. First and foremost, I am so sorry, Cindy, that you experienced that. That is horrible. Second, here is what happened, right? There isn't a good definition for discrimination. One that acknowledges and is not power agnostic. And so unfortunately, you speaking up for yourself in that way is something that a company can't reasonably differentiate between someone else doing the exact same thing to you. And so they're trying to apply their logic, but without considering power dynamics. The way to get around that and to bring someone on with you in that situation, and here are a couple of possibilities, right? Because, and this is where we get into that defenseless disruptor space, right? Knowing that this person is already saying things that are breaking you down, you're opening yourself up to what we know as defenselessness is, from defenselessness is that attacking feeling. And we're embracing it. We're embracing it because we know that we're going to be okay. And we're not just embracing it and taking it. We're saying, okay. And I'll give you an example of some speech you can use. So I hear you saying that it's important to you as the communications director that you have a say in the DEI copy that comes out of my office. Is that correct? And he might say, yes, right, because that's simple. And now you could say, okay, I understand that in your position, communication is key. And so I want you to be a partner at these various levels, right? So that you're setting those healthy boundaries. And then from there you say, all right, now that we've set these boundaries, I also want you to know that this is my office and I have directorship over it. And I am responsible ultimately for this piece. And so it needs to hit these targets that I have set. And so if we can find a collaborative space where we can both feel confident about this piece, I'll be happy. If that will work for you, then I'll be happy as well. But what I won't be able to do, unfortunately, is give you free rein to decide what is said and what is not said out of my office, because it is my professional voice that is being used. And using my voice in a way that I am not confident in is something that that gives me pause, that leaves me uncomfortable, and fill in the blank, whatever it is that your feeling is. And when you own your feelings in that situation, you're going to unlock that for your conversation partner, because it would be socially irresponsible, basically, for him to respond in any other way other than, I understand that we need to collaborate here. Right? Because the established point is we're both directors, right? We both have a stake. Oh, excuse me. Manager, excuse me. So we're both leaders. We both have a responsibility to our various stakeholders, and we both have responsibility to our teams in various ways. We need to collaborate and make sure that our overlap is moving us both towards that shared goal. And that's what goes back to identifying that shared goal and strategy as well. Is that helpful to you, Cindy?
It is helpful. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for jumping in. I really love being able to kind of move together in that way. And we have time probably to do that another couple of times before we're done. Is it okay is everybody good to move forward? Awesome. So getting back to collaboration, I think I just kind of explained collaboration just now, but share those boundaries and identify how it is that you feel your time would be best spent with your colleague. Identify what's most important to you and identify what's most important to your colleagues, so that when you're dealing with somebody who, again, isn't in that space of defenselessness, isn't ready for that disruption, that you're there to carry them along, whether they know it or not. They're just swept up in it. And it's pretty helpful because it gets a lot of the roadblocks out of the way. And definitely no one can report you for doing it. So back to the chat. I'd love to know, what are some ways you might be able to try the Defenseless Disruptor approach to advance your goals and initiatives in your workplace? And I know this one might take a little bit longer. So, and actually, you don't even have to pop it in the chat. We're a small enough group that we can kind of talk. So I'd love to just hear from you.
I have found that if I use my leaders from my ERGs to present what their group cares about and what they're wanting, that works very well. And many of them are better at the examples you just gave of how to do this work. And so I use them a lot.
Yes, tapping your resources is huge, especially when it's a group of people who have either social capital or who are able to navigate spaces that might not be welcoming based on, a marginalized identity over here that someone's really comfortable with, who has a privileged identity, right? Then you can kind of match them up and close that gap. It doesn't always have to be us. Any other examples?
Being clear about specific goals and identifying partners.
Oh, yes, that's huge. Thank you, Judith, for sharing that. Do you have an example of maybe something that you have in mind, or a situation that you're working through?
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I don't have one in general, but I'm working in a large healthcare organization. And so many projects go across our whole organization, and there's multiple hospitals, multiple departments. And so it's a really big effort to be very clear on goals and trying to figure out who are not only your collaborators, but the people that are going to make this happen. And so that takes a lot of time to do. And then, kind of then doing the implementation, the execution of what you're trying to do. So I think what you're talking about is really, really good. And then just thinking about how do you scale that in large organizations?
Yes. And I think scaling is huge. Do you want to maybe talk about, I really want this workshop time, or I guess usually it's seen as kind of a training, but I'm thinking of it as a workshop. So if anyone has anything that they're really trying to brainstorm through, I am done giving you new information. I just want to work with you all and see if there are any challenges that we can kind of work out together. in the time that we have, because the concrete examples, as Kim was mentioning, I think are where we really learn and get kind of a bonus.
I don't have any at the moment, but I'd be interested in hearing about, what are the challenges others might have. I learned from those as well.
Yeah. Oh, please join in, Maritza or Maritza.
You pronounced it very well the first time. It's Latin, Hispanic, Maritza, but Maritza. Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Maritza. I have found myself, I think this is a great methodology or process to internalize and to use. And I think sometimes I really do get emotional about, I'm so passionate about the work that I do, my work ethic, that I let the emotions take over and not have a cool head to really approach the situation. But I'm in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion because I truly believe in the space, and I always find myself feeling that I'm not always in an equitable situation, especially working in the D&I space. And it's with employers, for instance, employers not being equitable with their employees. How do you deal with that with your manager when you see that you're seeing the team members, some are having privileges or getting projects and you're not getting them, and they're kind of being evasive about it and kind of not being transparent about it, and they're in the D&I space, and that's what really is disappointing to me, that we're in the space, we preach it to our clients and customers, but internally it's not being practiced. And how do you delicately and professionally approach that without having to sound like you're a complainer?
Well, let me relieve you of one thing there, and that is delicacy. You do not have to be how do I say, a primrose to effectively use defenselessness, right? So let me just make sure that I dispel that, because this isn't about tone policing. And I'm going to give you an example that doesn't address what you said yet, but I'm going to come back to what you said. So there was a time where I was in kind of the comments at a higher ed institution I worked at, and this person was making kind of outrageous claims about how slavery was fine because it was legal. Yeah. It was not even recently. So he can't even use like everything is polarized as his reason. That aside, I mean, we're talking like 2017. So it was a time. And the person I was speaking with got kind of red in the face, angry. He was yelling. And I didn't think he was hearing me while I was talking. So I also yelled. But what I was yelling at him was, I care about you. I want you to hear yourself. I know that you can tell that what you're saying isn't what you believe. You're digging in because you said it and now you have to defend it. And I don't think that you are as ignorant as you are claiming to be right now. The way that you're showing up is not the way I want other people to see you, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't think he's ever had someone yell those things at him before. Probably not even a spouse. So suddenly we're in a situation where I am kicking him into a new gear that he wasn't planning on being in. And this had nothing to do with me being gentle. This had everything to do with me being defenseless, which means that I was still open to him yelling back at me awful things, but I just wasn't going to do that with him. I was going to yell affirmations at the top of my lungs until he heard me. And so I'm saying that to say sometimes you can meet people where they are, but it's about how you're approaching that person. And that has a lot to do with your internal fortitude. So I know that emotional feeling. I know it so well. The way that I personally kind of free myself of that is by reminding myself what I said to Cindy, which is, I'm going to be okay.
You're right.
Right. I know that what I'm talking about is something that they will understand eventually, or I will not work here anymore. Right. These are things that I can know, that I have kind of that latitude to make decisions and to adjust in ways that are going to keep me sane. And then from there go, okay, now what am I going to do with this person? Right? Because if it's a situation where I see inequity is happening, for example, someone is new to the team, someone is onboarded, but no one's onboarding them. And everybody else just assumes they'll learn the same way everyone else learned because that's just how we learn. But we forgot it's COVID, and we forgot, there's no onboarding process anymore that looks the same. And we forgot about all the resources somehow that, were there present pre-COVID that are not there now in this world that we're living in today. I would say, time out. Hi, my name is Sonia. It's nice to meet you, new person. I am going to walk you through this. And the reason that I decided to make that step that way when I saw an inequity rather than telling the supervisor directly was because I needed the new person to say, oh, that's right, I wasn't onboarded, for me without being prompted by me. And I needed not to be the person who communicated it with that particular person. We did not do well communication wise. And so getting back to Cindy's point, sometimes it's good to identify who is the right vehicle for the communication if I can't do it. Because I was upset, right, that my coworker who just got hired, we're supposed to be really excited about this new person, didn't even get a hello, didn't get a here's what your job is, didn't get a here's how you navigate all the intricacies of this very big complex organization. Here's how you deal with getting decisions made. And so by being able to separate myself a little bit, I could strategize and make a decision about what my boundaries were going to be, how I was going to approach that situation, and who I was going to solicit for it, even if they didn't even know they were being solicited. Because the goal was my supervisor needed to know that they needed to do their job without saying, you're not doing your job.
Right.
You're not doing equity, right? Because I could say that, but it's because I am not feeling like I can do something about it, which is coming from a place of defensiveness on my part, but also it's gonna elicit defensiveness right back. So does that kind of address a little bit of what you're talking about?
Yes. Thank you so much for walking me through this, my
Of course.
feelings about it and an approach.
Of course. And then I'm working with not only individuals in multiple generations, but also those that see themselves as activists. In a large organization that I'm new to, I'm going to use this defenseless disruptor concept to see if we can move us forward. I love that. If we can move us forward. Yes, Joy. You are getting it so deeply right now, I feel like, because the whole point is that it's an us and a we. And that is a huge part of the IIRP resource that I was talking about. So definitely check that out for kind of the communication tips and tricks. It's not exactly this. You're going to have to you would probably want to do a little bit of finagling for DEI, or you can work with me and hang out, and we can talk more about how I do that and how one can implement those things in a way that's useful to them. But I see you've unmuted, Joy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, this has been, really helpful because it's a government agency that I work for now. And it's just very interesting how people are in the activist realm so seriously, which is wonderful. but it can actually stifle the work. And I'm trying to help them understand how, if you think about it from a different perspective and you open your minds up to, we don't want one whole demographic of people working for us. We only want people of color. Like, it's just mind blowing, like what I'm entered into. And I'm just like, what, and I'm constantly looking for ways to how to, and not only am I been hesitant about showing up as who I am, because I'm the one that's like, no, it's DEI is everybody, not just these groups of people. And oh, we actually need this group of people to help move the work. But when you're, different generations, and truly, I'm no spring chicken, so I allude to that. But it's just like the younger, there are generations that look at things and they're like, no, we need to show up this way and we need to tell them what to do. I'm like, how successful have you been? Because the work isn't moving. You have all these beautifully written documents, which are lovely, but the work is, nobody's moving anything. Nobody's implementing anything. So I'm so in love with what you said, the whole thing, that I cannot wait to try and maybe use some different tactics, because it's definitely been, I've only been there 3 months, and I keep trying to tell them what I've done in the past has been successful. This is why now I'm your CDEO. It's like, here, this is why I'm here. And they're like, no, because, systemic racism. Yes, we know. I know about all of that, and then they're bickering with each other. And I'm like, you do realize that systemic racism, actually you're feeding into when you're fighting with each other. Like, it's like, what is happening? So this has been very helpful. Thank you very much.
Of course. And since we do still have a little bit of time, I'm going to go ahead and address that, because you may not know, I may portray myself as such an adult, but I have only recently joined the ranks of the respected over 30s. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited about that. But I also think that what you're talking about is really endemic to my generation. And I think that it's pretty funny also that I would kind of come up with this after observing my generation, older generations behind me, because we all have the same problem. And so I want to maybe talk a little bit about those strategies, because you're here and I want this literally to be something that you walk away with and go, I'm going to do something with this.
Awesome.
Especially since you were brave enough to share something like so real. So when it comes to working with intergenerational team, and you're kind of trying to bring them along with you, and you have that sort of identifier in your mind, and I hope that this sounds the way that I mean it to, that can be part of what also drags kind of the defensiveness out of your colleagues and out of your team, right? Because they're feeling like, but you don't see the value in what it is that we're talking about, and you do, is the trick, right? And so flipping that around and actually kind of yeeting the age part away for a second, if you start with how you have come to the place that you have come, and how there are elements of what your team are talking about that are embedded in that, and be really explicit about what those elements are, then you're talking about, okay, but what about this element? Their response has to kind of match what you're talking about, because they can't use a blunt instrument when you're using parts of their arguments, when you're using parts of their tools. And so you're showing that you share their language, you share their understanding, and you share their goal, right? Nobody wants systemic racism. And so, and to them, like, they might feel like, oh man, this person is just like going to keep us from being able to operate. But really what you're trying to explain to them is that there are multiple ways of operating. And when you work within a government organization, right, there are tactics that we employ that we don't employ in our private activism. And that is not selling out, that's doing your job.
I don't even know if there's an emoji for that right now. Yes, and yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Thank you so much.
I hope that's helpful. And then, the thing that I would add to that is just like affirming right, affirming over and over again that it's not about slowing things down. I have a little handout that only has 4 examples. Now I wish I had more, but it has 4 examples. And one of them that I think your team might be responding to is change takes time. That is a vague, and I use this word defensive term, knowing that that is not the usual use of the word defensive, but it pulls defensiveness out of others. And it also is affirming a point without meaning to. And that's why I say it's a bit defensive, right? When you say change takes time, or change takes tact, or change takes X, Y, or Z, what you're saying to students, or I'm saying students because I work with students a bunch, but what you're saying to your teammates is, I will not work as quickly as possible to make this happen. We will not be working as quickly as possible to make this, to advance this goal. We will not be accelerating this goal. We will simply be trying to get people to see it is a goal, which is ironic because what you're suggesting, Joy, is that when your team is operating, they're only getting so far as identifying a goal, but you want them to be able to be active. And so this is a way to show them, no, when we are activated and we're taking steps, we have to walk no larger than our stride. Yeah. So hopefully that will be something that you can like kind of activate and get folks on board with that way, because we all want to kind of fly. And in a spiritual sense, and in a metaphorical sense, and a metaphysical sense, maybe we can, right? And taking those steps is what gets us the momentum that allows us to fly, right? Because then you learn what it's like to have wind beneath your wings. You learn what it's like to be moving. So kind of encourage your team in that way, and I think you'll get a radically different result from them. And if you don't, call me. If you do, call me. I want to know. Oh, and I didn't get a chance to mention this, since we're kind of chatting at this point. Here are my socials and my Gmail, or not are, is my Gmail and my social. I'm very active on LinkedIn.